On today's show, how good are the QMJHL and USHL in the 2025 NHL draft class? We'll talk about that on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi, QMJHL scout for Elite Prospects, joined by Sebastian, USHL scout for Elite Prospects. We're also crossover scouts, but we'll mainly call ourselves that. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down the QMJHL and USHL draft classes for the 2025 NHL draft. Some things have changed since last year and just a couple of years before as well. So we'll talk about the strength of these two leagues. We'll talk about our top prospects in each. I give my top 5 for the Q. Sebastian gives his top 5 for the USHL, and we discuss that in detail. We also have an interesting trait to talk about in the first segment here, involving two pretty high-end WHL prospects. So we'll get into that in the first segment and talk about the strengths of the both leagues, and then QMJHL in the second, USHL in the third. Let's get right into it. But just before, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout for $20 off your first purchase. As usual, if you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review, and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get things started right away here with the trade that I wanted to discuss here regarding the two WHL prospects who were swapped. Ryder Ritchie going to Medicine Hat in exchange for Tomas Mrsic and 2 third-round picks. From the Tigers to the Prince Albert Raiders. So in terms of Ryder Ritchie, he had offered he had requested a trade a decent while ago, and he was a decent prospect throughout the whole year. Almost cracked our first round on a couple of occasions at Dauber Prospects, just ended out outside of it. Talk me through why this is an interesting move for Ryder Ritchie specifically.
For sure. I mean, I think a big part of that reason is that Ryder Ritchie is a quintessentially complementary player. He's at his best when he's able to add skill onto a line that already has a lot of offensive drivers on them. But last season with the Prince Albert Raiders, he was in a situation where he didn't have all that much offensive support, and more often than not was tasked with being the offensive driver on his line in a top 6 capacity. He played by far his best hockey of the season at the U18 World Championships, where he was playing third-line minutes, but was playing alongside highly skilled, highly intelligent players that were able to drive play, and he was able to find pockets of space, move really actively off puck, and really use his handling skill to create a lot of space for both himself and his line mates to create. He's at his best in situations where he does not have to be the primary puck carrier, and he will be able to play that role in Medicine Hat. He'll be playing with players like Gavin McKenna and Caden Lindstrom. It is going to be a fantastic situation for him there, and I think that Prince Albert also gets a player that could actually be a high-end offensive driver for them in this deal, and Tomas Mrsic. Talk me through his game on because we've watched a ton of him with the Caden Lindstrom viewings over the course of the last year, and I think both of us have a lot of appreciation for what he brings to the table and the amount of offense that he has in his game.
Absolutely. He's a great half-wall shooter with a great passing game as well. He's able to distribute the puck really well, kind of move left to right and take passes in motion and kind of start moving the puck up the ice. So there's a decent offensive package there in terms of goal scoring, stick handling, and passing ability. He's pretty decent in all three areas on that end. I'd say defensively, he's pretty much a net negative. I don't really see much defensive play in his game. But in the situation he was placed basically with Prince Albert, with Medicine Hat rather, he's with Prince Albert now. But with Mrsic, what was really interesting is the moment that Caden Lindstrom and Gavin McKenna, or some of those guys, or for example Andrew Basha as well, who was on that Medicine Hat Tigers team, as soon as they would leave the lineup for injuries or for tournaments or whatever it is, Mrsic would pop off as soon as he was given a better opportunity. It's just that with the amount of depth offensively that the Tigers had to work with, there wasn't really a spot for him to be playing full-time top 6 minutes, especially not on a top line by any means. So he was placed in a situation where he wasn't really utilized to his strengths, and he was mainly used as a complementary scorer on a second, third line. That's not the type of role that really feeds Mrsic. What he needs is a system that doesn't really make him think too much, and just helps him just set up in the right spots and get shots off. And Prince Albert is exactly what he's getting in that system. He's getting a team that doesn't have the most depth offensively, so he's almost definitely going to be playing full time in their top six, in a goal scoring role, any trigger man role on the power play, as a main offensive driver who's going to be finishing a lot of plays. And on top of that, the Raiders also added Lucas Dragicevic in recent months. So that's a great fit for Mrsic in terms of, how they play. Mrsic is, your typical offensive forward. Dragicevic is a hyper offensive defenseman, who needs to figure out the decision-making side of things in terms of his defensive game and all that stuff. That's definitely not an area of strength of him, but Mrsic is really interesting for what he brings offensively, and that fits really well with Dragicevic's tendency to be a real good distributor from the blue line on the power play. So I think the Raiders added two pieces there that will really bolster their offensive play and especially bolster their power play abilities. So I think that's a fantastic fit for Mrsic. Let's get into the main subject of this episode today, the QMJHL and USHL draft classes for the 2025 NHL draft. Let's start with the QMJHL because there's been a big shift this season. The QMJHL was by no means a strong league in the last 2 years. 2023 saw 0 QMJHLers drafted in the first round, and 2024 saw 0 as well. But now in 2025, we've got a bunch of very interesting prospects coming in. Caleb Desnoyers, Emile Guité, who we both saw at the Holinka Gretzky Cup. There's also some prospects that could make the first round, like Bill Zonin, Alex Huang, Justin Carbonneau. We'll get into all of that more detail in the second segment, but I just want to say this is a great year for the Q, right?
It absolutely is. And there's so much intelligent skill in this group of players. I think Caleb Desnoyers is a player that has stood out consistently in every viewing that we've both logged so far for this draft class, going back to D-1 tape as well. But his performance at the Holinka was just lights out fantastic. So middle driven, so intelligent, one of the paciest players in the entire tournament, and overall just consistently making the best decision available to him on the ice. And I think that he was key for Canada in this tournament. And I'm very curious to see how he's going to be performing for the Moncton Wildcats throughout the course of the season here.
Absolutely. And let's get into the USHL, your area of expertise here for this upcoming season. Talk me through kind of the difference between this year and previous years in terms of quality, in terms of the guys available, and what type of players we're going to be seeing this year.
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird draft class for the USHL. A lot of the talent that would typically be in the USHL is actually going to be in the NCAA this season. There's a lot of freshmen in the NCAA that are draft eligible in this draft class, which on the one hand makes the US NTDP a bit weaker as an overall group, and also takes some of the talent out of the USHL. So some players that would have been USHL standouts, with the NTDP, you would have obviously like James Hagens and Logan Hensler and Cullen Potter. You have a couple others like Dakota Rayo Mullen is in there as well. They have a group of players with a lot of skill and intelligence, and that are likely going to be first round picks or second round picks at the latest, that are making the leap to the NCAA. And in terms of the group of players that are playing that were playing in the USHL and now are actually going to be transferring to the NCAA, you have Sasha Boumedienne, who was playing some really good hockey in the USHL last season, really toolsy player, and he's off to Boston University to play with a bunch of skilled players, and I'm very curious to see how he develops there. But a lot of the talent was kind of taken out of the USHL for this particular season among draft eligibles, but there's still a lot of players to be excited about. Within the US NTDP, you have a couple players that I like a lot, highlighted by Will Moore. You have Charlie Trethewey, you have LJ Mooney, Cole McKinney has gotten a lot of off-season hype, and I'm not fully on board with that just yet, but he's a first-round talent and has a pretty well-rounded game as a whole. And outside of the NTDP, there's probably one player that I'm like really excited for in the USHL that's not in the NTDP as of right now, and that's Adam Benak, who will be playing for the Youngstown Phantoms this season. And he is so much fun. I cannot wait to talk about him more in the second segment. But beyond him, you have a couple other names that we'll talk about in our honorable mentions category, but I'm going to leave that for the next segment.
Absolutely, yeah. Adam Benak is especially the exciting one. I'm so psyched to see what he does in Youngstown this season. I've been following this kid since he was like 14, 15, every single time I've gotten to watch him, I just see more and more translatability in his skill set. He just compensates for, again, we'll talk about it in more detail, but his lack of size is not a problem. But that's our first segment done. We'll get into our second one where we talk about the QMJHL's prospects in detail. I'll rank my top 5 so far in terms of the Q and talk about a couple honorable mentions as well. We'll get into that in just a second, but just before, a quick word from our sponsors at Game Time. If you're looking to buy cheap tickets last minute to any event, Game Time is the best place to secure them. Game Time is safe, secure, and really, really easy to use, and they're obsessed with saving you money, especially last minute on tickets. You can find tickets up until the last minute before the event starts, and even sometimes an hour after it starts, tickets are still available over at Game Time. Again, yeah, like I said, they're obsessed with saving you money. They've got a bunch of deals to make sure that you get the best price for your tickets. Last minute deals, zone deals, flash deals, you name it, they've got it. And on top of that, you can get all-in pricing by just toggling the all-in pricing option, the feature on their app itself. Once you toggle the option, you'll be able to see exactly what you're paying at checkout, including fees, including taxes, including all that stuff. So it makes it really easy to pick up tickets for prices that make sense for you. Overall, I have a great experience with Game Time. I mean, I use them all the time when it comes to last minute events because my schedule changes around all the time. And I'm always able to find great prices at the last minute in order to go to an event really simply. And it's really simple. You just show them the QR code and you're in. It's a really simple process on that end. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, super simple. Just create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. So download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so let's move right on to our second segment here where we talk about the QMJHL's prospects. And I'll be taking a bit of a charge here by talking about my top 5 for this. But just before, let's name a couple of honorable mentions that barely missed the cut. And I mean barely. First and foremost and primarily, we're talking about Carlos Handel, who was the top defenseman for Germany at the Holinka Gretzky Cup. He's going to be going to the Halifax Mooseheads. He's about 5'11", 6 foot. 100 and $160, $170, so not the biggest defenseman, but so incredibly intelligent. Everything about his game, the connective thread, is processing, anticipation, timing, awareness. Those elements really shine with him on the puck. He's not the best forward skater in terms of pure forward stride, which doesn't necessarily gel well with the lack of physicality in his game. But what makes him really good is obviously the anticipation, but also his lateral mobility and backwards mobility. He has great edge work. He has great lateral crossovers. He uses those liberally to get up the ice and get down the ice. But he's a player who really focuses on kind of reading the play ahead, positioning himself ahead, great timing with his stick work. And he's got a decent tool bag as well. He's able to move to the backhand, make passes from that position. So I like the skill set overall, and I'm really curious to see what Carlos Handel does in the QMJHL this season. I think he could be the next great German pick. We've had a couple of those in recent years, and I think the Handel definitely has a skill set for it. I also want to talk about Philippe Veilleux from Val d'Or. He's a prospect that my colleague David Saint Louis works with closely, and he's really interesting. Put up some decent point totals in the QMJHL, looked pretty good in those viewings. He's, I believe, a tad undersized. I think he's 5'10", 5'11", but he works really well off the puck. He's an intense player who puts in second and third efforts, and he has some sneaky skill as well. He's able to move to the backhand. He's able to shoot in motion. He's able to kind of stop and go to kind of create separation in the offensive zone. I like his game overall. I'll need some more viewings, but given that I'm going to be moving to Val d'Or fairly soon, I'm going to get a lot of live viewings on this kid in the next couple of years. And the other honorable mention is a goalie, Gabriel Daigle. He came into the 2023 NHL draft class with a lot of hype, a lot of it. But since then, in the last couple of years, so his draft -1 mainly was a bit of a disappointment. That's why he doesn't make the top 5, and I don't think he makes my first round at all. But he's still an interesting prospect. I think he's technically sound. He's a decently sized goalie. I think he's 6'4". So he's got some decent range on him and decent footwork as well for a bigger guy, which is a good combination of skills usually as you move forward. I wouldn't be shocked at all if a team that really needs a goalie picks him late in the first round. But for me, he's a mid-second round prospect, and that's how I view him right now. That's my honorable mentions done. Before I get into that, though, I want to talk about the first pick because I think we both have a lot to say about this prospect. My number one pick in the top 5 here for the QMJHL draft class for 2025 is Caleb Desnoyers. No surprise here for me. There's a decent gap between him and number 2. Talk me through what you saw here at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup that really got you enamored with this game, because I think we're on the same page regarding Desnoyers, aren't we?
What didn't I see that didn't get me enamored? I think I was a fan of most of what I saw, whether it be the offensive ability. I mean, he has a wicked shot. He has really good like shot selection as well. He's really deliberate with what he does in the offensive zone. He's not a player that just like gifts away possession for nothing. And beyond that, a player who just like works incredibly hard every single shift. Always making a difference. I think the physicality is an area of strength in his game already. The skating isn't the strongest in the draft class, but I think that he has a level of intelligence and efficiency in his roots that is able to compensate significantly for that. He's going to need some one-on-one work with the skating coach for quite a couple years to catch up a little bit of ground on that end, but I'm not really worried in terms of it affecting his overall NHL projection. I think it's more about pinning down exactly where he ends up in an NHL lineup. And then defensively, he was fantastic too. Like just a very intelligent player who's able to make a difference in all 3 zones, is able to work in combination with his line mates. He reads his teammates really well and is able to complement them rather than getting their wires crossed consistently. And a player that I liked a bunch and I think is deserving of all of the top 12 rankings that he's been getting since the tournament, because he definitely looked the part of that in that small sample.
Absolutely, 100%. What really sold me on Desnoyers was the improvements in the skating. Last year, I saw issues with his skating that made him kind of overcompensate by being a really good off-puck mover, a player who really kind of slows down at the offensive blue line, draws players in, kind of opens up space that way. And he's good at that. He's really, really good at that. He's an incredibly, incredibly intelligent forward. But my concern on that end was, I mean, you can't just be a pure off-puck supporter, right? You need to be able to show some play driving skill. And now I feel like this year Desnoyers was, like you said, one of the paciest prospects at this tournament. He was pushing the pace constantly. He was using his footwork really well, kind of driving play up the ice. I was super, super impressed. But I want to move on to number 2 because it's still a decent prospect who also played at the Hlinka, mostly on Desnoyers' line, and it's Emile Guité, the left winger from the QMJHL. He's definitely smaller than Desnoyers at about 6 foot, 5'11", and he's a pure goal scorer. He's a pure finisher. Emile Guité is the type of player who's going to set up at the half wall in the power play and just rip shots, and he's really good at it. His shooting mechanics are fantastic. I think he's got an NHL shot for sure. Maybe even an above average NHL shot. It's a great release with great velocity, great power. And he's able to shoot it with very little space. He doesn't need to settle a puck to shoot it. Even when the puck's on its edge, he's still able to get some decent velocity on it. So a really interesting shooter, but he also showed some flashes of playmaking, of defensive ability in this tournament. And what I saw from him last year was basically a different player than I saw from him at the Hlinka. At the Hlinka, he was your pure kind of finisher, trigger man with some playmaking flashes. In the QMJHL last season, especially in the playoffs, he was very much a player who kind of focused on putting in second and third efforts on the forecheck, kind of back checking hard, being well positioned, finishing his checks. He was more of a checking forward. If you can take the best from those two versions of him and combine them, you've got a bona fide NHL player. That's for sure. I also want to talk about a very unique prospect with a great name, Bill Zonin, who plays for Rouyn-Noranda in the QMJHL. And Bill Zonin is huge. I mean, he was listed at 6'2", 175. That I think was last August when he was measured. So we should get some updated measures from the Q this season. In the playoffs in the Q, he looked 6'4", 200 pounds. Like, he was massive. And for a player that big to have that much finesse in terms of his ability to move pucks up the ice, his skating is really good. I think he's got a really decent package of tools. I think the decision making needs to come a couple steps, but overall, I really, really like what I saw from Bill Zonin offensively, and the size really, really helps. The size and skating combo is great. That's number 3 on my list. Then number 4 is another prospect we saw at the Hlinka, Alex Huang. He's a right-handed defenseman who played top pair with Matt Schaefer at the Hlinka, and to do that, you need to be good, and he certainly was. Huang is a cerebral, intelligent offensive defenseman. He loves to carry pucks up the ice. He's got really, really good crossovers and uses them really well to get up the ice. But on top of that, I felt like his defensive game really struggled overall, especially off the rush. This is why he's not a bit higher. And for me, he's on the fence to be a first rounder in the 2025 NHL draft. But overall, I think that the brain on him, especially offensively, is absolutely off the charts and really, really good. So I think that Huang, if he develops well, and honestly, I saw a bit better flashes of him defensively as his tournament went on, which is good news because as you go on, the competition gets tougher. So seeing him kind of step up his defensive game a bit as the tournament went on was great. But overall, I still think that things need to come a couple steps on that end. But man, he's so smart, so skilled offensively, a great shooter, a great passer. I love his game. And finally, to close things off here for our first segment, Justin Carbonneau is number 5 on my list. He's a 6'1", 190-pound winger who's going to be playing for Blainville this season in the QMJHL. And he's a son of Guy Carbonneau, who was a longtime Hab in a third-line role, one of the best third-line centers ever, honestly. And Carbonneau has some flashes of that in his game, some decent defensive responsibilities, some decent two-way play. But I think he brings some decent offense to the table. I think his game lacks translatability in terms of him being a really good junior scorer, but I don't really see outside of that really what he brings to the game in terms of offensive skill that'll translate really well. But I think you can still rely on that defensive ability and defensive game to be a decent NHLer. That's our first segment done. We'll get into our second real quick, where Sebastian will take the hold of the conversation here and talk us through his top USHL prospects. We'll get into that in just a second. But just before, a quick word from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects.
All right,
Alrighty,
let's dive into my section here. It's my turn to talk after 10 minutes of silence here. But thank you for talking us through the QMJHL. Lots of fun players there, and I got to pipe up a little bit there on Caleb Desnoyers. And you're welcome to pick one or two players as well to talk about here in my USHL section.
It's going to be Benak. It's going to be Benak.
What a shock! I never would have expected that one. But we're going to start off with not Benak. We're going to start off with my honorable mentions here. I've got two. They're two players that I've watched a little bit and have liked in those viewings, but still have a lot of question marks around them, and neither really project as a first-round caliber prospect, at least at this point in the scouting process. Again, we are in August. It is still early days, but starting off here with Matthew Lansing, who had a really good tournament at the Hlinka Gretzky. He scored 4 goals in 5 games for the USA U18 squad. Didn't add any assists, but this is an intelligent two-way centerman who's able to add a lot of value in different areas of the ice. I think that he's a pretty decent off-puck mover. He's able to connect his line mates quite well. He's not going to wow you with dynamism, and he's not the most like outstanding player offensively in the world, but he's able to do small things quite effectively. And I see a decent foundation for him to build off of, to build a potentially late first round draft stock this season. But there's still a lot that has to happen there. And he's playing with the Waterloo Blackhawks as a 6'1", 181-pound left shot centerman. Next up, the second honorable mention is a different kind of player, and that is Cooper Simpson. This is also a 6'1", 179-pound left shot forward. Definitely projected best as a winger at the NHL level and even at the USHL level, in my opinion. And he's playing with the Tri-City Storm, and this is a highly skilled player with high-end puck skills, really dynamic, really skilled. The creativity is off the charts when it's on his game, and we saw flashes of that at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup. We also saw flashes of it last season. I remember catching a couple passing viewings while we were watching Trevor Connolly for last year's draft class. And there were definitely games where Cooper Simpson stood out based on that high level of skill. The decision-making still needs to take a couple big steps in order to catch up to that high-end skill and the consistency with that. But as a D-1, he was still able to score 7 goals and 13 points in 31 games there for Tri-City. But that wraps up my honorable mentions. So let's go right into my top 5. And where you did a counting up from your first overall up to your 5th best, I'm going to do the opposite. I'll be starting with my 5th and working my way up to the top, just to make you wait as long as possible for Adam Benak. That's the only reason. Starting off here with my 5th best player in the USHL for this draft class at this stage, it's Cole McKinney. This is a player who's gotten quite a bit of hype already this season, and I've seen him ranked as high as 6th overall and probably averaging out around the 12 to 15 range on the draft boards I've been seeing. And I'm a lot more in agreement with the draft board that have him closer to 25 in their rankings. This is a really good player on both ends of the ice. He's relied on with the U17 NTDP program. He's a really good two-way centerman. When he's on his game, the defensive scanning, I think, still needs a decent amount of work for him to really be able to step into that role that he's been assigned so far in his USHL career. But he has a wicked shot. The pace, the intelligence, the composure, the physicality are all areas of strength in this game, but the skating's a bit subpar. He's not overly explosive or dynamic. He can fade into the background for shifts and periods at a time. And especially, again, those scanning habits are really inconsistent. When he's not scanning defensively, he isn't even taking a single scan over his shoulder. And things can fall apart quite quickly in those situations. But that said, I think that he has a lot of tools that could elevate him into like a middle six NHL role long term. His offensive game reminds me in flashes of guys like Brody Zemer and even Rutger McGroarty and how he functions, because he is a subpar skater, but he works well off puck. He's physical. He gets to the middle lane into the central areas of the ice around the crease. And he's intelligent with how he's able to attack those pockets of space. But I still think that there's a level in his game that he hasn't reached yet. I think there's a level of flair and skill that he can still access, but I just haven't seen it massively in my viewings just yet. So he's more of a late first rounder than a mid first rounder on my board at this stage. Next, we have an NTDPer again in LJ Mooney, a player that both of us adore. And this is an undersized right winger who's been playing fantastic hockey, playing up in age groups. And last year he was playing at the U18s, the World Championships for Team USA, playing a really, 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 really good middle six role, mainly on the second line. As a high-end facilitator and overall just like a speedy, dangling spark plug that can do a bit of everything. He's 5'6" and 146 pounds, but this is a highly intelligent, really high motor, really creative and fun type of player who plays with a bunch of pace and is just a small wrecking ball on the ice. He does everything that he wants to do, and I love watching him play. He reminds me in flashes of guys like Zach Benson and how he's able to combine high-end intelligence with defensive responsibility and intensity and offensive creativity and flair and dynamism. There's a lot to like in this package, but of course, he's very undersized. He's going to need to take some more steps and probably elevate his skating another notch to help make him make that leap to professional hockey in a couple years' time. But moving on, we have at number 3 a defenseman, the only defenseman here on this board, and that is Charlie Trethewey of the US NTDP, a 6'1", 190-pound right shot defenseman, very young for the draft class, an August 2nd birthday with a really wicked shot. He plays a physical two-way game. He keeps his gaps really tight when defending the rush. I liked how he's been able to implicate himself physically while still being a stick-first defender. He doesn't commit his body weight into one thing and then just get completely lost when he misses a play. And he's also moving over to Boston University next season, which I think is going to be a fantastic place for him to develop his game because, I mean, I feel like every player is either going to Boston College or Boston University nowadays. And also the idea of a Charlie Trethewey and Sasha Boumedienne pairing is really, really nice for my imagination. So I think that would be very fun for that following season. But for this year, he will be with the US NTDP looking to play big minutes and just evolve in that two-way role. Now, Hadi, is your time. We have Adam Benak at number 2, the 5'7" left shot centerman who's been dominant at like every level he's played at. He was probably the best player at the Hlinka. I mean, it was at least one of them. He was way up there, easily top 3 in my opinion, but just a fantastically skilled and gifted player who is moving over to Youngstown for this season, and I'm very excited to see how he performs in that system. But Hadi, talk us through this player and what makes him so special.
Absolutely. So with Adam Benak was so interesting is, again, I've been following him for the longest time, and what I look for with these undersized players, he's 5'7", 157 pounds as a center. What I look for with those players is how do you compensate for that? Do you work harder than your opponents? Do you outthink them? Do you draw them into you? Are you able to leverage your body along the boards in order to win more board battles than a similar player your size would? check, and check with Adam Benak. Everything that he does in terms of his overall play just more than compensates for his lack of size, especially his ability to seal the boards when, let's say, a rim pass is coming around. There's just enough space between him and the defender where he needs to get there early and needs to do the right thing in order to prevent the defender from out-muscling him. He just seals. He hits through defenders' hands rather than through their bodies. So what ends up happening is the defender can't do anything because his hands are locked to the boards, basically. And he has these little habits all over the place that just make him work so well as an overall play driver. Middle driven, intense, dedicated, smart, motivate. Like, he's got all the mental aspects and a lot of things in terms of his overall game that just compensate more than well enough for his lack of size. So I'm sold on Benak. I have him in my top 20 by a decent margin. That's my take on where do you have him so far in terms of overall range for the draft class?
That's the range for me. Like I think maybe mid-teens if I'm being optimistic at this stage, but not lower than 20. He's very much right in that little section. And as you said, there's a lot of check marks here for the Czech starlet. There's so much to like, and I feel like with every viewing, we both get more and more excited about what he has to offer because we're looking for holes in his game. And the more I look, the more I'm like, oh, there's a lot of areas of his game that I didn't appreciate at first that I'm learning to appreciate now with every passing viewing. And there's a lot to like with him, but there's not quite enough for him to be the number one player on my list because there is one guy that I have just been a massive fan of so far that I think projects really, really, really nicely as an NHL player. And that is William Moore of the US NTDP. This, in my eyes, is the best player of this NTDP class, and it's not super close at this stage. I really like what I've seen. I don't think he has the upside of like the player that we've seen in the past from the program, like the Will Smiths of the world. I don't think he's quite that caliber of prospect, but this is an elite level skater, a high-end motor, a really good two-way impact, a fantastic playmaker, a really good puck manager, just a really powerful player as well. He's 6'2". He's listed currently at 161 pounds, but he looks heavier than that to me. Left shot centerman, and he's able to consistently access the middle lane. He barrels his way down the middle of the ice. He combines skill with those hard areas of his game, with the high degree of intelligence and a really good feel for the game and what his team needs at any given point. And he's also a player that constantly brings his teammates together and brings them into the play rather than trying to create play on his own. He's very much a player who works in like together with the rest of his teammates, which is what you definitely want to see, especially in a program like the US NTDP. And for me, Will Moore has top 10 potential for this draft class and probably is the only one that I think will end up being picked top 10 along with like Charlie Treadaway, perhaps, from this overall USHL group. So it's not the strongest USHL class in the world this year, but there's so many individual players with fun storylines, but also that are just so much fun to watch and really exciting players for various different reasons, as we've outlined in this episode. But that wraps up my segment. And with that wraps up the show, right, Hadi?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you thought of the episode, what you want us to talk about next. If we missed a prospect, let us know. We'll go ahead and give him a look. If you really like him, just let us know down below and we'll get back to you on him. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, as always, remember to make us your first listen of the day. And please leave us a rating and review. It helps the channel out a ton. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. Make sure to tune in for our next shows as we close off August and officially get into September and our prospect coverage. It's going to be a bit more focused on the 2025 NHL draft overall, but we still got some notes on your favorite team's prospects. This has been Hadi Kalakash, QMJHL scout for elite prospects, with Sebastian High, USHL scout for elite prospects, and we hope you tune in next time.